Hello there and welcome. Glad you could join me once more. We're going to draw this from Anna Kingsford's Clothed with the Sun. And this is a series of visions or spirit communications, if you will, that she had. I want to share a little bit. This is from the fifth reading concerning the interpretation of material, or rather, concerning the interpretation of mystical scripture. And it was given that for the right understanding of the mystical books, that in their esoteric sense, they deal not with material things, but with spiritual realities. And that as Adam is not a man, nor Eve a woman, nor the tree a plant in its true signification, so also are not the beasts named in the same books real beasts, but that of the mystic intention of them is implied. It got my attention because, well, when we look at the book of Genesis, well, if that's not a mystical writing, I don't know what is. So, just out of mild curiosity, I explored the tale of Cain and Abel. Well, I shouldn't say the tale, just the aspect of Cain slaying Abel. And it provided some interesting and intriguing insights, because Cain and Abel could easily represent two modes of thought, two paths per se. Cain, whose name implies to possess or even to consume, could easily be thought of as the creator or founder of civilization. After all, that's what civilization does. It consumes us with all of these daily needs and such in order to survive, creating the powers that be, the structures, the laws that we willingly place ourselves under. And then Abel, who is said to perhaps represent transience or change or passage, may also represent the life of humankind being short, fleeting, almost non-existent. And when you look at, your past, just take a moment and look at it. Anything significant stand out? I'm sure there's a few, but for the most part, I look at my life in the past and, yeah. The only things we remember are the highlights and the low points. Very seldom do we remember anything in between. So this last speaks of the manner of life most people build for themselves. The manner of life I build for myself, it's almost non-existent by many standards. After all, I don't create these videos to become popular, to be an influencer, to gain notoriety. I make these videos to share insights, something that I have discovered. And I, in my writings, or in my readings, I should say, I have discovered that, for everything that comes to my mind, there are at least half a dozen other people who are the same thing is coming to their minds as well. So no, we're not in this by ourselves. We are all interconnected, and that's not what we're talking about. We are considering Cain as representing the birth and growth of civilization, which may be an apt description because, well, Cain did go on to build a city and such. And Abel could represent mankind being consumed by civilization. After all, Cain did slay Abel out of what? Jealousy? Because God was, if I recall the story, God was pleased with his offering, and Cain was jealous. But continuing, the most obvious acts of civilization, the most obvious fashion that civilization consumes us is through acts of selfishness. When Cain slew Abel, it was jealousy. Jealousy is a reflection of a type of selfishness. Civilization makes such demands upon a person that in order for them to resist, which is what civilization conditions us to do, is to resist civilization, to resist the powers that be, to resist change, to resist. We must expand great amounts of energy in order to resist. You don't want to change, you keep doing the same thing that you want to do, you keep repeating everything over and over and over again, and everybody else has moved on, and the thing is that everybody else just moves to a point to where they don't want to change either, and we are all stuck at these various points because we are resistant to change. Now, this doesn't mean that you should run from house to house to live, rent, so you have flexibility, mobility, go from job to job to job to gather all these different experiences. That's not the idea here. The idea here is all about beliefs, and it is our beliefs that shape us. That's it. Our beliefs that shape us. And we have to be mindful of those, because those very beliefs can trap us. So we expend great amounts of energy in resisting civilization and the demands that it makes upon us, which in turn effectively shortens a person's life, because all these things that we are resisting create stress within the body, within the mind, and that stress can be very dangerous. While it doesn't lead to death, it contributes to diseases and lifestyles that encourage death. And Abel, who assembled a table offering of fruits and vegetables, acquiesced to the demands of civilization, acquiesced to Cain. Of course, we don't really know if there was a struggle or not. We just make this assumption here because Cain slew Abel because he was jealous. So Cain consumed Abel. Civilization consumes us. Look at some of these people who are homeless. They're homeless because they resisted, and civilization consumed them, left them as living husks, so to speak. However, we have to keep in mind that when we acquiesce to the demands of civilization, not resist, but acquiesce, it's not that we surrender, it's that we accept. This is the way it is. This is what civilization is. We have to manage all of these stresses. We have to manage all of these demands. Even though Abel was slain by Cain, who was cursed, his life may have been the fuller life because we are unaware of any selfish deeds on his part. And this interpretation, this luminous interpretation, traces Cain and Abel not as historical figures, but as archetypes. And Jung was big on archetypes, and archetypes are representations, symbols that represent conditions, so to speak, or lifestyles, or these archetypes. They're just symbols. They're representations of, and they can be of competing modes of existence. Cain and Abel could represent competing modes of existence. One mode could be to possess all that you can possess, while another one represents a changing lifestyle, a lifestyle that adapts. It's adaptive. It's like civilization versus soulfulness, or resistance versus surrender. And we got to be careful with that term surrender, because it does not imply, we're not implying that you give up. We are implying that you accept. And when you accept something, you take it into you, and it no longer harms you because you understand it. You're able to adapt to it. Cain, as the archetype of civilization, becomes the builder, the founder, the one who names it and claims it. Yes, this is mine, and takes it. His act of creation is an act of domination, because civilization dominates our lives. It dominates our lives. We have to carve out time to pursue spiritual paths. We have to be intentional about that. So you could say, in a sense, that civilization helps us to become mindful, helps us to become soulful, helps us to become spiritual. Because civilization, and this lens through Cain, is one that is born of violence, slaying the ephemeral, slaying, taking away the breath, slaying it, slaying life. Breath is life, imprisoning the soul. It's the soul doesn't become trapped in this body. The soul becomes trapped in these mental concepts that we create. That is what traps the soul. It's not the body. It's our beliefs. It's our mental constructs. It's our designation of who we are. Cain is not cursed for murder, but for developing, creating a world that consumes its own soul, because civilization consumes us. And we are the soul of civilization. You could say that the snake that is seen consuming its tail is a representation of civilization consuming itself. We feed civilization, and civilization feeds on us. And Cain's punishment after slaying Abel, well, is to wander. And this wandering of his becomes a metaphor for our spiritual exile, because we become so enamored with civilization, so consumed by, consumed in consuming civilization. How's that for you? That we lose sight of the spiritual, and then the spiritual takes on something entirely different. because spiritual people do not oppress others. Spiritual people hold their hand out. Spiritual people help them to stand. Spiritual people care for them. Whereas those who have who have created a spirituality that is exclusive, selective, have not embraced spiritual aspects of life. They are embracing the aspects of civilization that, well, they represent spirituality to them. They represent that separation. They represent that domination. They represent that need to conquer, to take, to consume. You could say that Abel represents the fleeting, the sacred, the unpossessable, because life is fleeting and we cannot possess life. We experience life, and through our experience of life, it becomes sacred. It becomes the divine. And that is how we connect with the divine. It is not through possessing, but through experiencing. Cain's offering is not resistance, but it's a reverent participation. When you accept something and you take it into you, you integrate it, it becomes part of you. You are honoring the sacred because life is sacred. And even though life can be filled with violence, you accept that violence, you take it into you. It's not that you strike out at others. You may strike in defense, you may strike in protection, but your intention is never to purposefully inflict harm. It all comes down to this intention. So all that is spiritual cannot be possessed because it is fleeting. These religious experiences, these spiritual experiences that we have, they are brief. And many of us get a taste of it and we want more of it. And as we search for more of it, we become addicted to the search. And the search is not a search for the divine. The search becomes a search for an escape from civilization. And in that search for an escape, we become, well, we are consumed by civilization. There are some who consider that anyone who makes a life of giving, or some who are of the opinion that if they create a life of giving, that they will become spiritual people, but or that God will smile upon them, but they have missed the whole point of this. Because to give, if you make a life of giving, then your life of giving holds an expectation, whether that expectation is reciprocity or if that expectation is to enter into heaven, which, by the way, in its true sense, is God or the throne of God, the home of God. You don't achieve that through giving. No, because you have an expectation. When you give with an expectation, it is not giving. It is not loving your neighbor. Only when you do so, because you are moved to do so, do you truly become a representative of the divine. There's no discernment in need or benefit. There is only the desire for those who make a life of giving to be seen as being pious, as doing good works. And even Jesus recognized the falsity of such appearances. And their life is not a sacrifice to what is believed to be just and charitable, because their life becomes food for civilization, and they in turn become consumed by its unending appetite. Though Abel is slain, his life is much fuller, not in duration, but in depth. He lives in alignment with the sacred rhythm of nature, not in the cultural machinery of society, or I should say, society of civilization. Civilization is built through and maintained, well, by those religions who insist that people follow their particular doctrine. But the thing is that it's not the doctrine that feeds civilization. It's not the religion that feeds civilization. It's the interpretation that people have or make of religion that feeds civilization. The teachings of Jesus, while being solely for the Jewish people, were never exclusive. And he was always amazed by those who would come to him, because their faith was much stronger than those of his own people, whom he was trying to teach, whom he was bringing a different interpretation of the law. It is the addiction of authority that alters the life within the words, because it is not the doctrine that is the problem. It is the teachers of the doctrine who teach it in a way that is exclusive, or teach it in a way that is oppressive. Jesus never, ever, in any of the writings that are there, we don't know what Jesus thought. We don't know what actually took place. We only have interpretations of the experience of Jesus. And those interpretations, those experiences of Jesus, never once indicated that he was exclusive. He never turned anyone away. They turned themselves away. When the one person came up to him and said, "What must I do to follow you, to be like you?" And Jesus said, "Give away all that you own." And the person walked away depressed because he was wealthy. Perhaps he didn't pass the test. Perhaps he was enthralled by civilization. And those leaders, in satisfying their own needs, they leave the spiritually hungry, wandering, lost. I was one of those spiritually hungry beings. When I got involved with spiritualism, I asked, tell me more about spiritualism. What is the essence of spiritualism? And nobody had an answer. Nobody had an answer. I asked someone about a religion one time, and they quoted scripture. And scripture by itself is empty. If there is no interpretation, it is an empty vessel. Or perhaps I could say it is naught but moldy bread. So the sacred rhythm that many of us spiritual people seek for rests in nature and its gentle flow of ebb and tide, of back and forth, its gentle flow of one extreme to the other. And if we abide by this, if we understand this, then we know that when we are at one extreme, we know that we will move back in the other direction, and we will again hit another extreme, and we just move back and forth. That is the harmony of nature, to slowly move forward. Nature never goes in a straight line. Nature always twists and turns. Nature is very relaxed, very relaxing. It takes in, adaptive, making subtle changes as it moves along. Abel's death becomes a mirror of the soul. And civilization may kill the breath, the life, but civilization can never possess life. Life can only be experienced, and only the spiritual truly experience life because they have accepted the demands of civilization. They have made it part of them. They do not resist it. They do not oppress others. They serve others. And in serving others, they serve themselves. And when they serve themselves, they serve others. That is the spiritual life. It's not a life of giving, it's a life of serving. You don't have to give to serve. You don't have to give away all your possessions to serve. At the same time, a spiritual person may not have great abundance because they don't need great abundance. A spiritual person only needs that which is sufficient. Anything beyond that is self-interest. I rent rooms. Typically I rent 2 rooms. I had one upstairs, and I kept asking myself, I kept asking spirit or God or the divine, if I'm renting out that room, am I just being greedy or am I being helpful? Well, I rented the room out and I discovered I was just being greedy. I was not being helpful. So I no longer rent that room out. It's insights. It's difficult to explain. And spirituality can only be explained through example, through metaphor, through allegory, through stories, comparisons. Civilization is very cold, very distinct. You could say that all of this with Cain and Abel and all that I have said before can be summed up in this Gnostic teaching. Those who are of the world are not like those who are in the world, for one possesses and the other accepts. If you found this of interest, take a moment, like the video, consider subscribing. And while sometimes there is a break, life happens with me too. I am the spiritual facilitator for the spiritual sanctum of light. So I'm sharing all of this in a variety of venues. And I want to thank you for joining me for a brief moment. Enjoy the rest of your day.